If this is your first time attending one of the early school leaver community of practice meetings, hello, welcome. And I will introduce myself. My name is Brittany Boston, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. And joining me today is the center's director, Dr. Amy Julian. And our center, the role that we play with Early School Leaver is very much a provider of professional development and technical assistance, depending on how you define technical assistance. I know some people use that word. I'm not going to come over and help you with your computer, but we do some technical assistance with Early School Leaver as well. And so these community of practice meetings, they happen once a quarter. And they can really vary. So last quarter, we met with DJ, who is actually going to be doing a presentation for us this week. So when I get a moment, I will plunk the registration link into the chat in case you have missed that, because it's going to be a wonderful presentation. They will be discussing how words matter and the importance of language and support systems in place for LGBTQ plus individuals or students involved in your programming. And so last quarter, we spoke with them about kind of what you all wanted to see from that presentation. What were just some questions that you had? Did we want to start at kind of just having, proper terminology and how to have that conversation? And then today's conversation is more about grant writing tips. And so I try to have these, I always want it to be a conversation. I never want this to be a come, sit and just hear someone talk at you and then take your notes and leave. Because I personally feel that you all learn more from each other than you do from myself or Amy. Because you all are the ones running the programs and operating the programs, boots on the ground, as we like to say. And so it's always great to allow you all time to connect and share and vent in a professional, productive way. And so that's kind of what these are for. And then I'll do another little plug for next quarter session. We will have our colleague Kirsten Bayer sharing. So she is an instructor out at Richland, and she does a communications class, and she has found this wonderful tool that is through Illinois WorkNet that does a kind of mock virtual interview. And so it's a tool that she uses for her students to build up those interview skills, but also keeping in touch with the fact that our virtual world and the way that we do interviews now is forever changed. And you do have a lot of employers that are relying more on the virtual component, whether that's a phone call interview or a virtual interview with sort of an AI system. And so she'll be speaking to that next quarter. So be sure to check that one out as well. But today you get to be wonderfully listening to myself and Amy Julian talk about grant writing tips. So a little bit of background that I always like to share when I personally talk about grant writing tips is I am not an expert. I am not going to sit here and act as though I am wonderful at writing grants, because I'm not. I am blessed to be in a position where my director takes the heavy lift for a lot of that. But the center that we work for is fully grant funded. And so grant writing is how we keep our center going. I assist in helping, add information and activities, especially with the Early School Leaver grant. And then when it comes to partnership with ICCB, myself and Amy have been and will continue to be a part of the review teams that review not only the Early School Leaver applications, but Perkins grants. We've reviewed some adult education grants, even on the workforce side, reviewing some of those as well. So that's kind of where my background is and the view that I'm coming from sharing these tips. Amy, I know, has vast experience in grant writing herself. And so she has some wonderful knowledge to share as well.
So I've written a couple in my day, and I know many of you know me and are aware. But as Brittany said, like our center is entirely grant funded. So these are not just tips for early school leaver. We're going to talk a little bit about some of those, but these are also just general grant writing tips. So what are some things that, just tips and best practices, not only as somebody who does this all year round and on a regular basis, but also from the two of us who have reviewed grants, and what are some of the things that as people are reviewing, what are they looking for, which is really great for you to know and think about as you're writing your grants. So it's just kind of best practices across the board for grant writing.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and jump right in. And as always, feel free to, if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat. I have it opened up over here, so I'm trying to pay attention to it, or raise your hand or just unmute and feel free to, politely interrupt us. That's fine as well. And as Amy kind of mentioned, so this presentation itself is more of a broad general overview. Towards the end, I have some examples from some grants that ICCB themselves have actually received. Names and parties have been removed so that no one feels as though, we're pointing them out. But these are just really some general overall tips that you can take, whether it's for your early school leaver grant or any grant for ICCB, or even grants outside of ICCB for other parties as well. So some basic application terms really quick to get us started. Budget is one of the big things, right? That is when you are completing a grant, that is your financial plan of how you're going to carry out the project or the program. So most grants allot a certain amount of money, and you are writing for a specific amount of money, and they want to know, okay, if I give you this $50,000, tell me how you're going to be spending it. How are you breaking that up for personnel, for equipment, so on and so forth. So that budget is a very big piece of your grant application. And then the grantee is the legal entity that has been awarded financial assistance under one of the discretionary grants or cooperative agreements. And so as a applicant, you would be the grantee. You are who is getting awarded that money and then fulfilling that portion of your grant that you have written and the activities that you said that you would do. And then the project, you saw for budget, we mentioned project or program. The project is the activity described in the application. So what is the main focus of that grant? What is that project that you are trying to build upon within your institution or improve? That's really the main focus of your grant application.
So this next slide is one of my favorites, and I know it seems very simple, but it is so important. Read the directions. Each year, those wonderful individuals at ICCB, as they are developing the grant process, they spend a lot of time writing up the guidelines. So don't assume, read the directions, and then follow the directions. And I kind of giggle when I say that because it seems you're like, yep, seems simple. And I know Amy Biley's sitting out there thinking, yeah, Amy, we know. But seriously, follow the directions. And be sure that your budget aligns with your plan. So if you are going to spend money on something for this grant, for any grant that you apply to, explain to them in the narrative what you're spending money on. Because as reviewers, people do sit and they compare the two. We have the complete picture. We compare and look at the complete picture. And they want to know, if I'm going to buy said piece of equipment, what am I going to be using that said piece of equipment for in this particular project? And then reference the rubric. So when you look at grant and grant guidelines and anything comes out in your NOFA and NOSA, so notice of state opportunity or notice of funding opportunity, you're looking at saying, okay, what are they going to be assessing me on? And if they're putting, where are those points aligned and where are those things looked at? And so be sure that you're referencing that rubric to make sure that and it's kind of funny because I've literally pulled up the slide with my kids when we're talking about homework. Read the directions, follow the directions, be sure whatever, you said you're going to do, you do, or don't spend money where you aren't going to align it to the project. And then reference the rubric. Just as all of you are instructors and you guys know, like you put time, energy, and effort into that. And again, ICCB is very intentional with their funding on what they release and why they release it. And they do spend time going through those guidelines. So the worst thing you can do is assume and then or cut and paste. Cut and pasting is also a bad thing to do.
Well, and I think too, especially with number 1 and 2, I had kind of mentioned, how we're making this large shift to focusing more on the virtual aspect of things. Grant applications are more and more becoming a virtual entity where it is you fill it out online, you submit it online. So making sure that we're paying attention to those directions when it comes to how they want you to submit your application. Do they want it in snail mail, as they call it, or do they want it submitted electronically? If they wanted it submitted electronically, what's the time frame there? That deadline or that timestamp that they want to receive it by. And then also making sure that if it's a federal grant, making sure we're paying attention to those time zones as well. There's just so many different caveats there when it comes to those directions that we want to make sure we're paying attention to.
So another little sidebar story. The first grant I ever oversaw, I was an intern with Illinois State Board of Education, and they gave me a grant to oversee that went out to the system. And my mother applied, and I rejected her grant application because she did not get the proper signatures. She felt that because her daughter was who she was sending it to, that she could just sign for the fiscal agent, sign for the program officer, sign for all of it. And yes, that does say a little bit about the kind of person that I am, and I guess I probably shouldn't share too much. But seriously, follow the directions and don't assume that just because they know you or just because Angela's great people and she loves all of you and really appreciates your work that she is able to bend the rules. We have to follow the rules. Pay attention to the funding priorities. Funding priorities are used to communicate the required content for the application. Some of your stuff will have GATA requirements. Some of your stuff will have EDGAR requirements. Those are not just crazy people you meet at parties. EDGAR is the federal guidelines for education, and GATA is the state Transparency Act that governs the way in which we spend money. So just pay attention to those, make those a priority, and identify the activities that will be funded in each given year. And again, I cannot stress enough, tie those back to your narrative. Please do not put something in your budget that you're paying for that is not in your narrative, because that does, we do. I mean, as a reviewer, not as a grant, as a grant writer, I double check that, and that's what I have Brittany read over a lot of our stuff for. But also as a reviewer, I sit with the budget, and I'm also, and I'll tell you, as I'm very guilty of, I look at the budget first. Okay, what are you spending your money on? And then I go and look at the application. And if I don't see the things that are listed in the budget in the application, I'm like, why? Why are we paying for this if they're not actually going to talk about it or do it with these funds? So be aware of that. What funders want to know, and I will say I'll start and then I'll toss back over to Brittany. What is the problem? So why are you the organization that should receive these funds? What is the need statement? And sometimes it's labeled as that within the grant. Why is your organization can address the problem? What is the capacity? Do you have capacity to do this work? Who's going to be doing the work? How is it going to be done? Timelines, things of that nature. What will you do? That's your work plan. I'm going to put on professional development for this organization within this time frame. How much money do you want? There's a lot of people who say you always have to ask for under the amount. There's another group of people who say you always have to ask for the max amount. There's another group of people that say, hit where you're going to need to hit. I would say I'm in that third category. Don't ask for more than what you need, and don't ask for less than what you need. If it takes 120,000, ask for 120,000. The other thing is how in a lot of areas you have that idea of braiding funding or allowing in-kind contributions. So how are those measured and how are those put in your budget as well? What is the institution giving up or allowing because they want this program at their institution? So what are those things within the budget that, your air conditioning, your internet, things like that, that are your in-kind contributions, and those can be counted as such if that is required for the budget. Who else is contributing? Like, what partners do you have? Are there other organizations that you're working for? That leverage idea. And again, those words in parentheses are there because those are key terms that funders look for. So they want to know your need statement, your capacity, your work plan, who you're leveraging. How will you measure your success? And that's not how if I spent all my money on successful is not what we want to see in a plan ever. So how do you measure success of what you're doing? Is it your students are finding success? You have this many placements. I do caution anybody of ever saying they're going to be 100% successful and they're going to place all of their students. Great goal, not really attainable and terrible to try to measure, because if you don't place all of your students, then technically you've failed at meeting your evaluation. So be sure that when you're talking about evaluation, you're looking at what are those measures for success and what are those evaluation tools you have in place. If you need some tips on that, there's a really great toolkit that our center developed for evaluation that talks about the different fundamental components of evaluation, and I'll throw that in the chat. And then how will you keep things going after funding runs out? What is your sustainability plan? And again, that can talk back with your leveraging. We're going to leverage all these resources. We're going to leverage these partnerships. We're going to leverage this in-kind contribution. And then because of our success, i.e. our evaluation, proving that what we did will work, we're going to be able to sustain.
Righty, so some top 10 grant writing tips. And here's the thing, I'll let you know now on a little secret. You're gonna see some things pop up multiple times. We're gonna start to sound like a broken record, and you're gonna be like, Amy, Brittany, we got it. You want us to double check. You want us to follow the directions. You want us to make sure we have all of the pieces we're supposed to have. But those are the elements that are very important. And as individuals who probably have a lot of experience with writing grants, I know myself, if I have something that I do habitually, there are times where little things can fall through the cracks because I'm just so used to doing it that it just becomes kind of this routine, and there's a misstep somewhere. So it's always nice to kind of just keep these ideas and concepts in the forefront of our minds, and just always nice to have a refresher and a reminder. So when we're talking about grant writing tips, be concise, especially for that narrative piece. ICCB specifically, I know, is very deliberate in the questions that they ask and the information that they are looking for. And as someone who has reviewed grants and continues to review grants, if it takes you 2 pages to answer one question, I'm probably not going to read the whole answer. So just making sure that you are, you're being concise, you're being specific, and you're getting your point across and answering that question to the best of your ability. Assuming the audience is not familiar with your program, whether that is explaining partnerships and who's responsible for what, explaining acronyms. I know in the world of education, we have our own set of acronyms that we use, but you may even we've come to find that certain programs have their own set of acronyms that we use. And a lot of times they're the same letters as this acronym over here, but they don't stand for the same thing. So just making sure that spelling out those acronyms, if you are putting in a specific individual's name, include their title so that we're aware of kind of their role and what their responsibilities are. We know that can be a lot of turnover, and so that individual may no longer be there or may have moved into a different position. So just making sure, again, being specific, being concise. When you're talking about your activities, making sure you're setting SMART goals. So specific, again, like I said, we're broken records, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So what is that specific goal? What is that specific outcome you're wanting? How are you going to measure it? can you measure it? As Amy said, if, it's, oh, well, success for this grant is measured by spending down all of the money. Well, you can find ways to spend down all of the money, but it might not be impacting that project that you are focusing on. So how are you measuring those goals? Are they attainable? Is it something that is a realistic goal within that time frame for your program to meet? Are they relevant to the project and the grant that you are focusing on? And again, is it timely? If it's a 1-year grant application and you are talking about an activity that could potentially take 2 to 3 years to fulfill, it's not timely for that particular grant. So just keeping those SMART goals in mind. Proofread before the final submission. So running a spell check, right? Have a colleague who is attached to the program review it. But then I also always suggest to have someone outside of the program review it as well. Because again, that pulls back in that number 2. If you can have someone outside of the early school leaver program read your grant application and it makes sense to them, you're on solid ground there. Or they could read it and say, okay, well, but what does this mean? What you have ESLTP, what does that stand for? And kind of catch those little things that you who are neck deep into the program may not be able to catch when you've had your eyes on it for the past 2 weeks. And then don't be afraid to ask questions. And I know Angela and I have actually presented on this for an ICAPS learning community a few weeks ago. And one of Angela's comments for this particular point was that ICCB, especially if it is a competitive grant year. And so really quick, what it means to be a competitive grant year is if it is open to outside entities as well. And so that other agencies, programs, entities are able to apply to that grant rather than a continuation year where it's a 4-year project. Here's what we're going to continue doing. And so for competitive grant years specifically, ICCB can answer certain questions, but there are certain items that they are not able to answer. And a lot of times what they do there is they will develop an FAQ and have that for information for programs to utilize. But again, with the competitive year, they don't want it to be looked at as favoring one program over another by providing more information than you would the full field. But don't be afraid to ask questions when it comes to, hey, this says you want it submitted electronically by 4 p.m. Does that mean it needs to be in your inbox by 4 p.m. or, so on? Questions like that.
And if you can, always submit a little early. If you cut it down to the wire and something happens, that can lead to a lot of headache, stress, and, wanting to have a stiff drink. So try to submit a little early. Work with you. And again, if you're working with an RSP office or you're working with your grants office at your institution, do have the due diligence to have it in a little bit early, because sometimes if they're like the ones that I work with, they do from time to time say, well, it's not due till the 15th, so we're not going to, worry about it till the 10th. But early is better. That way, it's in and everything's taken into account. And then ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions, especially during that grant time. And again, there's also funding opportunities that are outside of ICCB as well. Ask questions there. These rules apply to everyone. I know we're talking more about ICCB because that is your funder for early school leaver, but think about that you can always ask questions to these, because these are universal truths. I'll take 6 since I've talked about 6. All items must be accounted for. Items listed in the budget must be mentioned in the narrative and vice versa. And again, I understand we sound like a broken record, but you will not believe the amount of times we've said this, sat down and read a grant, and we're like, what is that? Why do we need a forklift? What's a forklift for? So that's important. Spell out all your acronyms at least once, preferably the first time you use them. And that goes back to that number. I don't remember what number it was, like 3. Don't assume, I think it was number 2. Don't assume that the program knows you. So when you submit, like for ICCB, yes, Angela's going to be reading all your grants, but so they also do independent individuals to read. So most organizations do that. As I said, I've read for different places around the state, and it's important to make sure they know what you're talking about. So don't assume, well, I think Brittany and Angela are going to read this, so they know exactly what I'm doing. So if I just use, we're going to do the Scout project and the tent project and this great stuff, we don't know what those things mean. So write it as if the person reading it is not sitting right beside you in the program. Question whether activities are worth repeating. If they are enhancements, explain them. So as you're moving from year to year, even in those continuation projects, and you're saying, okay, so we did this year, and now we're going to do this same event again. We're going to do the etiquette lunch with the women from the Rotary or something like that. What are the enhancements you're making? Why are you doing it again? What success did you find? So then as the funders, they can say, okay, well, they've done this, etiquette lunch 6 times now. However, each time they've done something different and they always have great success, and we're serving, 60 students. So that's fantastic. So that's why it's worth repeating. New fiscal year means new plan. If you do find yourself in a time crunch and cutting and pasting, please go back and reread, make time to reread, because if you don't, just understand that ICCB does not cut and paste. They take time to write the guidelines. They take time to have things new and fresh and innovative. So the expectation is the same for the programs. DCEO is the same way. ISBE is the same way. NSF, all of them. And anybody who's handing out money is really intentional about how they're handing out money. So new fiscal year does mean new plan. And then don't be afraid to be innovative. Look for new solutions to old problems. Don't be afraid to use technology. Don't be afraid to ask for technology or money for technology to do something cool within your classrooms, within your programs, because innovation is a good thing. You might need to explain it, you might need to validate it, but don't be afraid to be innovative. Don't just do the status quo because the status quo has always worked. Change is inevitable, and change is also a good thing.
Okay, so some common mistakes, which again, we've kind of touched base on some of these throughout, but just to kind of put it in black and white here for you. Failing to allow enough time to submit via mail or electronically. Again, paying mindful attention to those deadlines, both the date and the time of when your funder expects that grant to be received. Also, when it comes to signatures, if you have entities within your institution that need to sign off on this, I think most of you kind of know or are familiar with how quickly things can move through the college system when it comes to getting those signatures. And so just be mindful of that if you have to add an extra week cushion in there because you need to get the fiscal department to sign off on it. Whoever it may need to be to sign off on it, that's going to take a little bit more time. And then also paying attention to whether an electronic signature is acceptable or if they need a wet signature, which I personally hate that term, but I know that that's kind of what we're, pen to paper signature, because those will take, again, a bit more time to get than possibly an electronic signature. And that all goes into your timeline and when you can get that turned in. Not reading the application package in its entirety. In case we have not said it enough, making sure that you're reading all of those directions, checking off all of the pieces, the budget, the narrative, those entities of the application that your funder is expecting to receive of the full package, making sure those are all together, tied up in a nice little bow, ready to go. Not following formatting guidelines. I know I can speak on this personally as a reviewer. One of my needling points when it comes to reviewing a grant is when there's the format's just not followed and questions aren't answered in order, and I kind of have to go back and like piecemeal or a question isn't, maybe they decided they didn't want to do it in this format and they wanted to do it in Word to write up their questions, their answers, but they didn't bring the questions along with them. And so I'm like, okay, well, what question are you answering here? And so just trying to follow that format, especially when it comes to the budget. Now, I know Amy can probably speak to this more, but that may mean that you have to do multiple budgets, because I know for our grants, ICCB has a budget form, ISU has their budget form that they follow. Amy has her own that works better for her brain and how she organizes things. So it can be a bit tedious depending on how many different formats you have to fill in, but specifically talking about the funder and making sure that you are following their format for that application.
So show of hands real quick. How many of you have to do more than one budget when submitting a grant? You have to put it in like an RSP format. You have to put it in, and it's not, Brittany gives me credit for my brain. My budget is aligned with how it's going to be allocated in DataTel, because we use DataTel. And then we also have the GATA budget. Am I the only one that has to do multiple budgets? Show of virtual hands. Nobody? Elizabeth does. Okay. Everybody else just does one budget and they're done. You guys are, I'm so jealous. So, because at our organization, the GATA budget, that you have to explain everything. And by the way, when they say put the narrative in the narrative, like put your budget justification in the narrative, that's needs to be in there. Don't just say see narrative of proposal. But well, then I'll stop. But yeah, so feel bad for me then, because I have to have a budget that's in DataTel for once we get the grant, how it's going to be divided into DataTel, a budget for RSP, and then whatever the funder wants their budget in. So maybe I'm gonna have to talk to them about that. But okay, go ahead.
So not obtaining required signatures on required forms, which I touched on, and then failing to proofread, which we've touched on multiple times. So I'll just leave it at that. Strategically plan when you're going through. Make sure that your plan is realistic, right? Again, that goes back to those SMART goals, and that everyone in your organization who needs to have input has input. And that goes back to sort of that partnership. Are you partnering with, for early school leaver, are you partnering with the ICAPS programs within your institution? Are they aware of, what you're putting in the grant? Your fiscal department, do they need to be aware of the budget and how you're spending that money? Making sure that everyone has a say who needs to have a say. Specify who is doing what in the action plan, and making sure you're including a timeline and who is accountable. And again, make sure that these people know that you're including them in that timeline and that you are making them accountable. You want to make sure that if you are assigning an activity and a goal outcome to someone, that they are aware so that they are able to fulfill that activity. Build in regular reviews and reflection. And that is something that, I think in 2020, we all kind of got, I was going to say smacked in the face, but we all kind of got punched in the face of, wow, okay, so the grants that we had planned out for that fiscal year definitely did not take shape the way we had expected. So making sure that you're able to adjust, and if a problem arises, you can address it. And by allowing that review and reflection to happen on a routine basis, you're able to kind of, COVID, none of us saw that coming, but you're able to kind of catch those speed bumps before they get too big. And then make sure board members review the plan and the status quarterly if needed. Again, it goes back to making sure everyone in your organization has some input and is aware of what's happening within their institution.
And in your case for early school leaver, that's really making sure your adult education programs and your CTE programs know you exist and who you are. A lot of times early school leaver is an afterthought. It is something that is like, oh yeah, we do that too. So take the time, make time on their calendar, see them, be seen by them, and tell them about what all the great things you're doing. Because that will help as you strategically plan. That'll also help with those signatures. Having them know who you are and what you do makes it a lot easier for them to approve your budget modifications, your proposals, all that things as they run through. So don't be afraid to be your own cheerleader when you're year round, not just when you're planning your proposal, but year round. Talk about the great work you're doing because you are doing great work. And be sure people know about that, especially your direct supervisors and their direct supervisors. So it might not be like your board, like for your college, but it might be just your adult education division and your CTE people that you work with. And the next slide is really, this is something that I struggle with because I really want to do this, and often it's time consuming, and do we have time? And sometimes for a grant, they come out of nowhere, right? You're like, hey, can you, this is an opportunity. We have exactly 30 days to get this submitted, or 90 days or whatever. If you have 90, ooh, you got a lot of time. So that's awesome. But do a SWOT analysis. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are your threats? This is really best for a competitive grant. This is best for something that you're saying, why am I putting myself into this space? So like, for example, if you're an early school leaver program and the youth programs are going to have a new round of NOFOs coming out pretty soon. So with those youth NOFOs, what are the things that, they're looking for? Is it good for me? Is it bad for me? Is it something that I want to do? Is it something I don't want to do? It's a great tool to really gauge your organization's strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. And then also for you, as you're doing that, when you're writing those grants, looking at ways in which, like, if your weakness is staffing, do you need to staff up? If your opportunities are all this great innovation that we're not, are we using the people that we have at our disposal to the best of their ability? And it's really also fun to do with your team. So who's on your team and who do you work with, or who's within your partnership, who's within your inner circle? So fun SWOT analysis for planning.
So submitting tips, and I'll move through these rather quickly.
A lot of these because
yeah, don't wait till the last minute, right? Whether it's snail mail, electronic, don't wait till the last minute. Allow yourself some extra cushion there. Know the specific deadline, date and time, especially for those electronic submissions. If it's an electronic submission, but you encounter some technical issues, right? Because we know that while technology is fantastic, doesn't always work how we want it to work, when we want it to work. See if it's an option for you to be able to actually print off the application and turn it in through the mail. I believe, I don't know how long ago, but with ICCB, well, not just ICCB, but there was a new way of submitting applications and electronically, and it didn't work as smoothly as everyone had hoped that it would. And so that was something that had to happen, where programs printed off their applications and actually stamped, put them in the mail, sent them to ICCB. So just seeing if that's an option, making sure you have time to do that if needed. And again, proofread, double check, have a fresh pair of eyes, look over your proposal before submission. All things that we've been talking about multiple times. Okay, so let's put it into action. So these next couple of slides are specific examples of questions from an ICCB grant narrative and answers. And so we'll kind of go through a few of them. And then if you'd like to come off mute or put in the chat kind of where you see room for improvement, or if it's a wonderful answer, perfect. Or if you want me to go through them, we'll see how everybody responds here and then move that way. So one of the questions, I believe this was an adult education grant application, was describe your diversity, equity, and inclusion practices for recruitment and retention. And so a program answered, as Boston Center is a part of Julian Academy, BC is required to follow the Academy's policy in this area. Please see page 25 for the full policy. So how do we feel about this answer? You can give it a thumbs up. You can give it a thumbs down. Feel free to come off mute. Any thoughts, comments? Or I got some. I'm happy to share mine.
It's very vague as far as like myself not knowing anything about who this entity is.
And Peter posted in the chat, the author is assuming we know their DEI plan. Yeah, it's a little frustrating, isn't it?
Yep. Yes. So all of the above, both great comments there. And not only are they assuming that we know what their DEI plan is, they're not even really answering the question, because we're not necessarily asking what is your full DEI plan, but what is its relation to your recruitment and retention strategies? What is the role that DEI plays within those portions of your programming? And also, as a reviewer, the please see page blah blah blah, or please see previous answer in section 1.5 on page 16. And maybe I'm just lazy, maybe it's just me, but I really don't want to go through and flip back and go back to this page and, try and piecemeal the questions together. And again, these don't have to be lengthy answers, but you really want it to be specific to the question. So recruitment and retention, how DEI plays a role, and answer that within that portion there. Okay, so this is the same question, but another answer. And so I'll just go through this one quickly and you guys can read if you want. But for this answer, it really talks about the coordinator and their role. They're part of the DEI council. They're tasked with reevaluating all of recruitment policies and procedures, marketing campaigns, practices. Their strategies are analyzed, evaluated, and endorsed by the DEI council. So for the recruitment function of the committee, they endorse our recreation, increased maintenance of social media content. Primary language of those districts is identified and evaluated, current marketing campaigns, right? So for this one, they're giving more specific information on how DEI is being infused within their recruitment and retention policies and strategies. And you can see that it's not a super cumbersome response, right? It's not a lengthy answer, but they're hitting those key elements. You have who's responsible. You have that district coordinator. They talk about their DEI council and how it impacts both recruitment and retention within that program and organization. So this is a great, specific, concise answer. Okay, we'll go through one more and then we'll have some time for questions and comments. Okay, so the question is, this grant will be from January through December of 2023. Identify the projected unduplicated number of students to be served. So this program's response was, for the 2022-2023 academic year, our program aims to serve 1,168 students, 550 of whom are new enrollees, 160 to 203 participants served through Earn and Learn partnership models. Additionally, they plan to scale the total number of students served from 879 to 1,168 at the 10 schools they serve on a pathway to serving 3,750 students within 4 years. So this will involve continuing the signature program, our Earn and Learn program, and now serving all eligible students at the local college. So thoughts on this response? Do we like it? Do we love it? Do we think it needs some work?
Feel free to unmute or post it in the chat, but all I have to say is wow.
I see the first answer. So I found the answer to the question, which I assume would be 550 of whom are new enrollees in the program. But maybe the second paragraph, at least if I was writing it, I would think maybe that goes because that's the plan moving forward. Maybe that paragraph belongs in a different place in the grant application where it's like, what are your plans to increase enrollment? But I think the answer's there, so it's good, would be my inclination.
Yeah, and Anne says doesn't match the timeline the grant covers. Yep. So yes, Peter, you're correct. The answer is there, but you do kind of have, they throw a lot of numbers at you. So you do kind of have to be like, okay, I got 1,168, I got 879. Which one am I looking for? And the question they ask January through December of 2023, whereas their response covers the academic year. And again, this is specific to the grant you are applying for. Typically with ICCB, we're looking at fiscal years. You may have grants that are looking at academic years. You may have grants that are looking at calendar years. And I know as someone who did not always work in the grant world, that was a mind shift that I had to make. I'm like, wait, what? We're not talking January through December. We're talking, like how are our months aligned here? What is this? What is a fiscal year, academic year? So just making sure that you're being mindful of the timeline and answering within that. And then it does kind of go more into within 4 years, which great information to know. But the question itself is really asking for that 1 year time span for those students being served, not necessarily the 4 years. Okay, so again, this is that same question, right? Unduplicated students from January through December of 2023, and this is answer number 2. So this program says we are targeting 5 different cohorts starting in January of 2023 through December of 2023 with an average of 18 to 25 students per cohort to have a total of 90 to 110 plus students in FY23. So this one is shorter, right? A lot less numbers thrown at us. So I think it's right. It's a good answer. We could use maybe a little bit more there, but again, we're just grabbing a snapshot of the grant. We're not really sure of what all has been put in the narrative before this or after this. But it's concise, it's to the point, it's answering the question. And I think this is a great one to show you that your answers don't, sometimes, and I will speak personally for myself, if I'm in a review, right, with Amy as my supervisor, and she says, okay, so what did you do here with this project? And I want to rattle off everything that I did, right? Because I want her to know I'm working. I'm marking off my tasks. I'm fulfilling my role. And sometimes we can kind of fall into that habit with a grant application, right? We're selling ourselves, we're selling our program, we're selling our institution. We want to make sure that this entity is fully aware of, hey, we can fulfill this, we can do this, we're able to make this work. But when it comes to answering those questions, you want to do just that. Make sure you're answering that question, and then you have time throughout the whole application to be able to brag on your center and your program and how you can fulfill this grant. So those, I believe, yep. So those are all the examples I have. So we still have about 10 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, any comments, we are happy to answer. And it doesn't even if it's just about early school leaver in general or any upcoming professional development that we have, any of those items. Okay, And if we don't have any, I am more than happy to give you all 10 minutes back to your day. And
I do
we'll-
have a really quick one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So currently in our ESLTP program in Joliet, I may have asked this before, but I don't know if I got a solid answer. We're currently giving the Constitution test. Would it be okay to use the ICCB, if the high school is amenable to it, the ICCB Constitution module to fulfill that? Or would that be more of a question to follow up with our high schools if they would accept that?
I would say that would be a question to follow up with your high schools with and ICCB as well. That is out of my
Okay.
purview as far as, what's required of that module and what sort of, that fulfills when it comes to the Constitution test. But definitely reach out to Angela, and then she may just tell you to follow up with the high schools and see if that's something that they will accept. But yeah, I would reach out to ICCB on that one. All righty. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Amy did put links for DJ's session is this Thursday. I am very excited about it. They're going to have some great information to share. They also have a colleague that will be joining them as well. And so I think it's going to be, and it is just early school leaver. So that will be nice because again, it's going to be similar to this where we can have a conversation. DJ has some information to share, some education to provide, but we will be able to have a conversation as well. And then the other upcoming community of practice meeting is that professional development link that you can follow there. And then as always, feel free to check out the ICSPS page. I try to do what I can to share any of the WIOA Wednesday webinars that I think would be pertinent to you guys and share those out with you, but always check our professional development calendar and see what we have coming up. And as always, if you have any questions, you can always email me. And thank you again and have a great rest of your Tuesday. We're one day closer to the weekend. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.